let's talk about the incredible story of American movies. Now, this isn't just a tale of red carpets and movie stars. Nope. It's really a story about constant crisis and, somehow, even more constant reinvention. We're going to look at how Hollywood, from its silent beginnings all the way to today, has saved itself over and over again by completely changing how it tells stories. Let's get into it.
So how do we get the movies we have now? Well, it really boils down to a few key moments, a few crucial turning points. We're going to see how a silent clown who is obsessed with getting every detail perfect, a super strict moral code that accidentally invented a whole new kind of comedy, and yeah, a motorcycle gang movie that just blew the doors off the box office, how all of that shaped the cinema we know and love.
All right, so let's go back to the very beginning. In the early days, filmmakers had this massive job ahead of them. I mean, they weren't just making films, they were literally inventing a brand new language from scratch, all while trying to build a global business. No pressure, right?
And boy, did they learn fast. By 1915, you have D.W. Griffith's The Birth of a Nation, which proved movies could be these huge, powerful epics. Flash forward just 10 years, and Charlie Chaplin is a global superstar with his own studio, meticulously building these insane sets and even artificial blizzards for the gold rush. And then you had absolute madmen like Buster Keaton, who, remember, had no CGI, no special effects, and was doing his own death-defying stunts in masterpieces like The General. These guys were literally writing the rule book for cinema as they went along.
And this quote from Chaplin, it just tells you everything. When he said the Gold Rush was the one film he wanted to be remembered for, you can hear the ambition. This wasn't just about making people laugh. This was about creating art, about building a legacy. It was this incredible mix of pure creativity and smart business. So, just as silent movies were hitting their absolute creative peak, bam! Hollywood gets hit with a 1-2 punch. First, sound comes along and changes absolutely everything overnight. And right behind it comes this huge wave of moral panic that leads to some incredibly strict censorship. But you know what they say, crisis can lead to creativity. And out of all these new rules and restrictions, the screwball comedy was born. Think about it. Filmmakers couldn't really show romance on screen anymore, not explicitly. So what did they do? They invented a new genre built on ridiculously fast, witty dialogue. It was the perfect way to explore love and class by just talking circles around the censors. And the film that basically started it all, It Happened One Night? Well, its own stars thought it was a total disaster. Get this, Clark Gable was only in it because the studio was punishing him, and Claudette Colbert was totally convinced it was the worst film of her career. But the audience? Oh, they couldn't get enough of it. They made this little, low-budget movie a massive hit, and it proved Hollywood had found a brilliant new way to tell a love story.
For the next 3 decades, pretty much every story Hollywood told had to pass through the filter of this thing called the production code. The rules were simple. On screen, crime could never, ever pay. Justice always had to win in the end. This moral straitjacket forced filmmakers to get really, really clever. They had to create these amazing, charismatic anti-heroes that you couldn't help but root for, even though you knew they had to meet a bad end.
But of course, a system that tightly controlled couldn't last. After World War II, you could feel this new anxiety creeping into American life. And at the same time, legal battles started to chip away at the total power the big studios had. You could start to see the cracks forming. And you can literally see that mood shift right on the screen. The 1930s, that was all about wonderful escapism. Think Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers dancing their troubles away. But by the mid-40s, something darker emerged, film noir. Movies like Double Indemnity were cynical, they were gritty, and they captured this deep and brooding pessimism that really felt like the post-war world. But not every movie was trying to be an escape. John Ford's masterpiece, The Grapes of Wrath, stared the brutal reality of the Great Depression right in the face. This review from The New Yorker just nails it. Critics knew right away that this was something special, a powerful piece of art. And while all this was happening, the art of filmmaking itself was taking these huge leaps. I mean, Orson Welles' Citizen Kane was nothing short of a revolution. He used deep focus shots so everything was sharp, dramatic, shadowy lighting, and sound design techniques he learned from radio to create a world that looked and felt like nothing anyone had ever experienced before. It literally changed the visual language of movies forever. Okay, so fast forward to the 1960s, and Hollywood is in the middle of a full-blown identity crisis. Television is stealing away its audience, there's this huge generation gap, and all the old tricks, they just weren't working anymore. The industry was really on the ropes. So Hollywood had a pretty stark choice: adapt or die. The entire industry had to figure out how to connect with a younger, more cynical generation, an audience that didn't trust authority, didn't believe in the old fairy tales, and was desperate for stories that reflected their own chaotic reality.
You can see this change perfectly by just looking at two movies. In 1967, you have old Hollywood's take on interracial marriage in Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. It ends politely, with a nice, uplifting speech and a tolerant resolution. Just 2 years later, you get new Hollywood's Easy Rider, which is this raw, violent, desperate flight from the system that ends not with a speech, but with a shotgun. The difference is staggering.
And the money? I mean, the success of Easy Rider was just mind-blowing. It was made for about $400,000, and it brought in $60 million. That sent a shockwave through the entire system. It was definitive proof that these weird, edgy, youth-focused movies weren't just art. They were a potential goldmine.
And that really brings us into the modern era, an era that's been defined by this constant push and pull between two big ideas: the giant, everyone-pleasing blockbuster on one side, and the rise of the fiercely independent, artist-driven film on the other.
If you want to see just how creative and diverse this time was, just look at the Best Picture nominees for 1976. You have the ultimate feel-good underdog story with Rocky, a nail-biting political thriller, a really dark dive into a disturbed mind with Taxi Driver, and a brilliant satire about the media. I mean, what a lineup. It was just an explosion of artistic energy.
But what's so interesting is that the movie that won, Rocky, was seen as a very intentional throwback to the classics. Even Frank Capra, a legend of old Hollywood, said, "Boy, that's a picture I wish I had made." It just goes to show that even in this really cynical and gritty era, people and the Academy were still hungry for stories about hope and the American dream.
And then, in the 90s, the whole game changed again with the rise of these super powerful independent studios. The strategy for a movie like Pulp Fiction was totally new. The studio, Miramax, spent just as much money marketing the film as it actually cost to make it. Nobody had ever done that before, and it worked. It turned this quirky, cool art house film into a massive cultural event and a box office juggernaut.
And that became the new playbook. This was the modern formula for success. You find a daring, creative project, you build up a ton of buzz for it at film festivals, and then you unleash this massive marketing campaign to push it into the mainstream. It's the art of turning a film the critics love into a movie that everyone goes to see.
So, from the very first silent pioneers who were just making it all up, to indie rebels who came in and rewrote all the rules, the one true constant in Hollywood has always been change. The history of American film is really just a history of responding to one crisis after another with incredible creativity. And that leaves us with one big question. In today's world of streaming, AI, and a totally new global audience, what is Hollywood's next great reinvention going to look like?